Let's have a conversation. Yeah. Let's have a conversation. Oh, yeah. Look. Yeah. Hey. Let's have a conversation. Woo. Pick up some gems, life is all you make. Go. We keep it real, we don't talk to fake. Tell them hottest talk show on the net, coming for all the mates. Let's have a conversation. Woo. Pick up some gems, life is all you make. Go. We keep it real, we don't talk to fake. Tell them hottest talk show on the net, coming for all the mates. Let's have a conversation. Yeah. Let's have a conversation. Oh, yeah.
Hello, everyone. This is Michelle Biggs, CEO of My Best Everyday Coaching and Consulting and the host of Real Conversations. Thank you for joining this next episode of Real Conversations, and I have some special guests joining me. But for those of you who are new to my platform, I am a master certified life coach. I'm also an executive coach, career coach, workplace, and leadership coach as well. 34 years as a senior human resources professional, 22 years with a pharmaceutical company, global pharmaceutical company, and 14 years with an investment bank on Wall Street. So I'm excited. I started this platform really wanting to help people, find a way to help people in a different kind of way. It kicked off in 2020 after all the craziness of everything, the pandemic and some of the racial tension that was happening. And who knew that I would be going 2.5 years with this platform, talking about different life topics with the goal that something that is shared, something that you hear, you'll be able to apply in some shape, form in your life in a positive manner. Of course, doing your homework. And let me just stress that. Please do your homework. You want to make sure that what you're hearing is really applicable to you. And this topic is no different. My mantra for this platform is learning and growing together, and we're going to do just that even tonight. The topic for tonight is how to deal with toxic people. I know even when I say those words, I can feel myself getting tense because we all have those people in our lives. It could be a friend, a family member, someone we're dating, a life partner, even a coworker that just at times will make you feel some kind of way. And the question is it a toxic situation that's about to explode or not? But what we want to do tonight is to talk to you about ways that you can hopefully manage it in a more positive and healthy way. So let me introduce my guests. First up is Miss Quinnell Hickman. Quinnell. Hi. And she is becoming a regular guest on my podcast. She's also my soror, y'all. So I'm very proud of her and what she's doing. But Quinnell, talk a little bit about what you're doing.
Yes, thank you so much for that beautiful introduction. Hi, everyone. So happy to be here. My name is Quinnell Hickman. I am a licensed individual and couples therapist. I have about 8 years of experience. I am the CEO of Counseling to Comfort Marriage and Family Therapy Services, as well as a speaker and a mental health educator.
Thank you, Miss Quinnell. And I have joining me someone she has introduced me to, and I'm so glad to add him to my list of professionals now that I can call on when I need a therapist. And y'all, some of these topics that I talk about, we need to have some real professional certified people to help peel the onion around some of these topics. So next up is Mr. Nathaniel Turner. Mr. Nathaniel Turner, how are you, sir?
How are you? How are you both? It's great to be here with you.
Great to have you with us. And like I said, I am honored to have you on this program. And Quinnell, thank you for the reference. I really, really, really appreciate it. Nathaniel, tell people about yourself.
Yes, so I am Nathaniel Turner. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist. Off a similar track as Quinnell, actually the same track as Quinnell. We're both MFTs. We met about a year ago, so I think that was a really good introduction because it leads to opportunities like this where we can share platforms and really have vulnerable discussions. I've been in the field for about 4 years now, going on 5. I'm like a baby licensed therapist. My license is maybe like 2 months old, but it's getting a lot of traction. I've been in private practice for about 2 years, and I've also been working with social service systems in both Philadelphia and New York, which is where I currently work right now.
Thank you, Nathaniel. And I'm glad to have both of you on. I'm glad to have a male and female perspective, because I think we do naturally, we do see things different ways. But as licensed professionals, like I said, I'm a licensed master certified coach. It brings a similar things in terms of what you learn, but it brings an authenticity in terms of what you do. That makes this conversation, to me, just a necessary conversation coming from people who deal with this stuff on a regular basis. So thank you two for both making yourself available tonight. So I got some questions for you guys. Just a couple of questions.
Just a couple.
Because as I said, this is this is real, right? We can't escape it. At some point in your life, you are going to run across someone who is, whether they fit that category of toxic or not. And we're going to start with, the definition of toxic behavior coming from your perspective, right? Because everybody may look at it differently. So who wants to start?
I can jump in. I'll jump in.
Thank you.
So I think the one thing that I left out of my introduction is that I am a licensed therapist, but specifically I'm an advocate for the cultivation of Christ-centered models of holistic wellness, right? So whenever I'm looking at mental health, I'm always looking at it through a Christ-centered model. And for that reason, this is the first time that I'm actually talking about this topic of I guess, like, toxicity, but I know that it is something that it significantly pervades culture. Like you said, Michelle, it's really kind of like a hot button issue, a hot button topic with a lot of people. So I want to try something a little bit different with toxic, right? Even starting with the word toxic, I want to start by reframing it. I'm going to challenge myself to maintain this reframe for the duration, and I'll invite you to do the same or not, take it or leave it. But this is what I'm going to try and do for this discussion tonight. I want to reframe toxic as tainted, right? Because I think that tainted leaves potential for good. There's a restorative, there's a redemptive potential for it. And I also believe that as mental health therapists, as people who people look to in this field, as a thought leader, as somebody who has the credential, has the experience, does this day in and day out. Our opinions matter. What we have to say about it matters. And so I think that if we're going to talk about a topic like this, it's necessary that we're looking to mitigate stigma and reduce shame as much as possible. And I think that we can start with that by really emphasizing the universality of brokenness, right?
Yes.
We're all, to an extent, we're all toxic, right? Or to an extent, we're all tainted, right? There are aspects of taintedness, there are aspects of toxicity that we all embody because we are born into a context of knowing, right? Our world is toxic, our world is tainted, right? And so we all partake in some form of toxicity because it's deceptive, right? Like at its heart, something that's toxic, something that's tainted is deceptive, and it appeals to appetites that we've been programmed to develop because it presents poisonous sustenance, right? And so I want to talk really briefly first to define a Christ-centered model of holistic wellness, and then I want to circle back around to the actual definition that I have for taintedness for tonight. So a Christ-centered model of holistic wellness, it facilitates the cultivation of abundant quality of life as an entry point to abundant quantity of life, right? And so in a therapeutic sense, what does this consist of? It consists of an integrated understanding of both the individual and relational implications of truth applied within a framework that's clinically therapeutic, right? Systemically holistic, and also biblically exegetical. Right. So subscribing to
He's getting deep on us, Cornell.
We said we're gonna talk. Are we gonna talk? We're gonna talk. You know what I'm saying? Like, what's up? Okay, look, okay. So right. Speaking objectives, right? So starting from a place where we're looking at truth objectively and then kind of like working our way back, right? Starting at the root and then worrying about the fruit, right? So ultimately, I'm going to say tainted or toxic is anything which draws you away from a concentrated, consistent pursuit of holistic wellness, which is found in relationship with and submission to Christ as Lord of your life.
you said a mouthful there.
I did. I know.
And I'm gonna tell you, but we're gonna peel the onion on a lot of
Mhm.
this. And something that you said really resonated with me, because at the end of the day, right, we want to help people manage this better, right? But behind the person who's perpetrating this behavior, there is trauma, there is hurt. People may not want to admit it, but there are
Mhm.
things behind the behavior, right? Doesn't mean that you have to tolerate it, but there are
Right.
things behind the behavior. So I like the way you kind of frame this whole piece. Just kicking us off, Cornell. Cornell, what do you want to add to that?
Yeah, so he actually said a lot about the way that I think about toxicity, because I think when people think about toxic behavior, they're really talking about things that are hurtful, things that stay with you, things that you think about. It's really, really hard to, separate yourself from how you're being treated versus what your worth is.
Yes.
And for me, it was interesting to start to talk about some of this stuff, because so many times people will say like, oh, this relationship is toxic. I think they mean hurtful, but I like to educate, right? And so I think people are confusing toxicity and being hurt for all these labels that now, are being thrown out so easily. And I know we're going to talk about it more, but
exactly.
Just because something is hurtful, it doesn't make the person that you're dealing with a narcissist.
Right.
Just because something was hurtful, it doesn't make the person that you're dealing with a gaslighter, right? So we have to get to, and I'm very big on calling a spade, by the way.
Yes.
So,
yeah.
If you were hurt, it's okay to say you were hurt, but, just being careful not to be so quick to label people, because that's part of the reason why mental health is so taboo, right? There are things that are disorders, and then there are things that are just like, okay, these are experiences. We all have bits and pieces of these things. It doesn't make this person an overall negative person or overall, like toxic person. So I think I truly, truly agree with some of the stuff that Nathaniel was saying.
Yeah. And to me, there's a pattern there has to be a pattern over a period of time before you start to label people. To your point, one time in a situation doesn't make that person whatever label you want to call them. But it's the pattern of behavior over time. If it continues, to me, that's when there is a red flag that something is amiss that needs to be dealt with.
Yeah.
Right. And we talk about that even in coaching, right? What's the pattern of behavior? What's happening? And is it a pattern, or is it a one-time thing?
And
right?
some of the stuff takes so long to actually call it that.
Yeah.
You don't have to stay around.
Yeah.
Around for how long it actually takes to label the thing. You get to say when enough is enough, but just be careful around saying like, you know what, this was really hurtful. This went against my boundaries, versus going around calling the person like a narcissist.
Yeah.
Saying that you were being gaslit. But if you know what it is, like gaslighting specifically, if you know what that is, then call the spade a spade.
Exactly. Because I tell you, once I learned some of the terms, of course you don't know. Well, for me, didn't know what it was that I was dealing with. But once I started to understand what it was, I can kind of pinpoint some behaviors that definitely fell under the definition. Right.
Yeah.
And that's the thing. A lot of times we may not be able to call it what it is until we, until
it's not right.
Yeah, it's not right. Yes, go ahead, Nathan.
Yeah, what I think that there's a couple things. If my mind be moving real fast, so I'm gonna try and grab onto some of the stuff, because Cornell just said, she just gave a lot of gems right there. I think that the way that we talk about mental health is very much so in a vacuum, is very much disengaged from all of the other aspects of a person's life. And also disengage from like a person's environment, what a person, you had spoken to trauma, right? That's a big, like that's a huge influencing factor for how somebody is presenting, right? Like, it's the whole nature versus nurture model, right? There's sure, to some extent, could it be a person's personality or their general disposition? Sure, right? But I also think that it's necessary to gracefully look at the whole context, right? Which includes the nurture, right? What's been modeled for them, right? What do they see on a regular basis that is presented as normal, right? And so what are the expectations that they're forming as a result of that, you know?
Right.
And I think that speaks also to the fact that that mental health really, it should more, I believe that it could more appropriately be modeled, be labeled behavioral health, because by the time something manifests as a behavior, which is actually what we're looking at, it's been something that's going on in their mind, right? Neurochemically, there's been wiring, there's been a lot of developmental experiences that have taken place over a long period of time that have brought a person to the place where it's now presenting as a behavior that we now put that label on, you know, real quick and dirty. And so, you know, yeah, that's really good.
Y'all are
Michelle, what you sipping on? You sipping on water? You sipping on
water? It's water. It is water. This is good stuff. I got the right people on here for a lot of good reasons. Y'all saying some good stuff. And y'all, I tell my audience a lot of, I have rehearsal, but we don't talk about the answers. I want this to be authentic. And the fact that you guys are bouncing off each other, and as I said, just things are coming up. So I love it. I love it. So, so you guys you mentioned these terms, and I want you guys, because there are very popular terms, narcissism and gaslighting. Talk about that a little bit, if you don't mind. Who wants to go first? Narcissist, go ahead.
Cornell, you want it? You want it this time?
It doesn't matter. So gaslighting is it's this form of like a psychological manipulation, where it starts off with compliments, and it also starts off with you being like fed and trusted information. So let's say you're out on like a first date, second date, first time talking to a person, second time talking to a person, and compliments are cool, right? But then the person is like revealing all this information, and you're like, oh wow, like they feel so comfortable to talk about that so early, right? So the person is doing a lot of things, and those types of the compliments and the information that seems like they will only tell somebody that they trust, that's called love bombing. And so if that's happening pretty often, a person is likely starting to do some of those things. But again, it's a pattern that you might recognize over time. And then lies will start, like little lies, right? So if you are with the person on the first date and you are like, that seems a little iffy, right? But they have complimented you, they have told you so much information, they're talking a lot, and it's not particularly about you yet, right? I'm just talking about gaslighting, right? So if it's not particularly about you yet, but it's more so centered on them, they're just feeding you a whole bunch of things that make you feel like, okay, I can trust this person, I'm comfortable with this person. That's gaslighting. When the lies start, they start off small, but then they get bigger over time. And then a person will start to like warp your truth, not just their truth, right? So if there are things that you're saying are that's not happening, will basically tell you that certain things aren't the way that you think, to the point that you literally feel like confused or crazy, like, wait, am I, like maybe I don't remember this correctly. So that is gaslighting. I'll stop there, because narcissism is a whole other.
Yeah. And the gaslighting thing, I think the key point in that is there are times you feel like, am I crazy? Because you're hearing things and it's like, did I hear that right? Or didn't they tell me something different? Or right. To just, and then I know there've been times when I've been in those situations where I'm just like, okay, I'm not sure what this is right now. And I didn't understand the term. Once I understood the term, I mean, it made sense to me what was happening. Right. So, but then tag on gaslighting. Anything you want to add? Gaslighting. You want to add anything there?
I think that Cornell did a really good job of giving, like, we'll say, like the life cycle of gaslighting, like how it gets to that
good.
place, and then how it sort of like manifests real time in a relationship. I would really just simplify that as like gaslighting. It's a technique in emotional abuse, right? It's a technique of emotional abuse and manipulation that specifically causes a person to doubt their grasp on reality, right? Which I think is what Quinnell, outlined very, very clearly.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's not, you guys help me understand, that's not just in a partner type of relationship, correct? That could be in any kind of relationship that you're in.
It could be professional.
Yeah.
I think that nowadays corporate is starting to do that a lot to people, especially with the pandemic. It's been like, oh, we're not overworking you. Oh, you can handle this. Oh no, let's just put more on your plate. You got it. You did so well over here. And a lot of people are like, no, but I'm tired. Like this is too much. Right.
Yeah. How do you manage that? Yes, absolutely.
Like, no, you're good. You got it. So it definitely can happen. It definitely can happen in any relationship.
Yeah. And then when you were saying that, I was also thinking about maybe the other end of that could be like selective hearing. You know what I'm saying? Like we selectively, and Michelle, you should probably talk about some of this because you work in HR, right? You've been in HR for 3.5 decades, right? So when somebody gives
why he had to say it like that? 3.5 decades, dude.
3.5 decades. That's experience. That's time. You know what I'm saying? No, but I mean, like it's when you have an employee, I would imagine that like they say, this is what I heard, right? This is what my supervisor told me. And then the supervisor come around later on and say, "Oh no, that didn't happen," right? And let you not have a paper trail, right?
Yes,
you not have that email. Let you not have them receipts.
Documentation is key.
Yeah.
And also with coworkers, right? I mean, as I said, and in my promos I did last week and this week, this toxicity can show up in every type of relationship that you may have, even family. We'll talk a little bit about that in a few minutes, but it's real. Talk about narcissism, you guys, a little bit. How does that fit into this category and what's different?
I'll take what's different. So the way that narcissists will show up is they are focused on you. So they're focused on getting more and more information from you so that you can feel like they care, so you can feel like they're paying a lot of attention to you. Whereas gaslighting is more so like giving you the compliments and telling you a bit more information. Narcissists might just be asking you a bunch of questions because the goal is to figure out what you like so that they can manipulate it and use it to their advantage.
Okay. Nathaniel, more?
I think, well, a little bit more. I mean, I think so. Quinnell had touched on this to start, right? Narcissism is a personality disorder, right? Like it's in the DSM, right? Narcissistic personality disorder. That's where people are deriving the labels that they're using for narcissism. So I mean, again, trying to mitigate stigma wherever possible. I think that we should be wary of kind of just like throwing that label onto people just because there are certain, let's say, behaviors that will be associated with that diagnosis, right? At the same time, at the core of it, narcissism, it focuses on overt and covert forms of, abuse, right? Emotional abuse, physical. This can manifest in any type of intimate partner violence, right? It could be financial, it could be technological, it could be religious, right? It could be through use of children, right? It could be through through sex, right? Oh yeah, now she wanted. It could be used as a way of coercion, right? It's a very insidious thing, right? And Michelle, I think that you have said this also, that when we're attaching that label to someone, there does need to be like a consistent pattern, right? Where there's a pattern of behavior that we can actually trace and track, right?
Yeah, that's deep, because I came upon the term that you just mentioned, because if I say it, I'm probably going to mess it up again. Narcissistic personality disorder, right? Did I say it right? And it's
Mhm.
funny because to hear that it is an actual diagnosis, it is something that it was deep to me, right? Because you hear that term all the time. People say, oh, they're a narcissist, right?
Right.
But it truly is, from what I'm hearing you guys say, it truly is a clinical term, right? That you guys deal with in terms of helping someone to manage through whatever it is they're managing through.
Yeah,
In terms of that is what I'm hearing, which
Yeah.
is, ooh, wee.
add a little bit though.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And I have a question. Okay, I have some questions coming in, y'all. There've been people commenting. I think I
So
got
go ahead. I don't wanna
someone
pre-
asked a question. Let me see if I do this right. Let me see if I can. So the question is, hold on.
What's up, Patricia?
Let me make sure. Hold on. Can narcissists change?
Okay.
Well, now I'm gonna let you take that one.
Yeah. So I wanna peel back some layers here, right? And Patricia, just bear with me, everybody. This might be a slightly long answer, but so there is narcissistic personality disorder that is a mental illness that takes about at least a year to diagnose. You have to see things very clearly for that year. And there are some things that you will see, which I can get into later, but I don't want to stretch it out. I don't want to stretch it out just to answer Patricia's question. But then the term narcissist, that is actually not a mental disorder. That's being categorized now as a trait, like almost like a personality trait, right? So almost like is how willing is somebody to change versus like how not willing are they to change? How neurotic and excited do they get versus not?
Mm-hmm.
So when we're talking about either one, it's extremely difficult to change. It's rare. It can happen, but it's extremely rare. Because when we're talking about the personality trait, it's something that's been, and I guess this is the difference, right? When it's the personality disorder, it is genetic, it's neurochemical. When it is the personality trait, it's something that has a lot to do with the setting, like how you were raised and how you view things. And in both cases, you don't particularly realize what you're doing. So the narcissist oftentimes doesn't even want to go to therapy. They're like, what do you mean there's something that I'm doing? No, there's not. So that is a big reason why, it's hard for them to change. And usually what drags them into therapy is because somebody is forcing them to go, like they're leaving them. And then it's like they don't want to lose that love and affection. And so then they're going to therapy. And so you might see changes, but I think it's to make it permanent is the thing, right? Like you can only stretch something but so much before it, almost like a rubber band. I heard this analogy, right? You stretch it, but as soon as you let it go, as soon as you're no longer on top of that narcissist, then they will go right back to the original form, right? So little by little, you can see certain things, but complete change.
Yeah. So it's really, so if someone's coming to therapy with regards to that, you're helping them to manage the disorder.
Yeah.
To your point, it's not something they get healed from per se.
And really, you're helping them manage the disorder. You're helping that's if the person came solo. But if they're coming as a couple, as a part of a couple, you're helping that partner who is struggling to deal with this behavior. You're helping them really manage their expectations.
Yeah.
Because the person is not really likely that they are going to change.
Yeah. And we'll talk. I'm sorry, one sec. I said Vanessa's asking a question. How can you best deal with that person? We're going to get into that in a minute, Vanessa, in terms of how do you deal with any of these things that's considered toxic, right? But go ahead, Nathaniel. Add if you want to add to that.
No, I didn't want to add. I believe that that Quinnell definitely has like the breadth of knowledge and experience in this particular realm. I had a question myself because I was listening, I was learning. So you had mentioned like the systemic element of it, right? The relational element, how a person learns to deal with this person's behavior. I'm wondering if that also entails helping the people to perhaps recognize ways that they can be feeding into the behavior, or that they may be complicit in the behavior, right? Yep. Because I think that, you know, as what you were talking about before, you mentioned environment, and when I'm thinking about environment, I'm thinking about reinforcers, right? And so I'm wondering, what are the different things in the environment, like what are the different aspects of the environment, but really the people in the environment that are reinforcing this type of behavior, perhaps even unbeknownst to themselves. Like how would a conversation like that look?
Yeah, so it's very, very helpful to point out patterns to people, right? Point out patterns as opposed to just saying like, you're doing this and this is harmful to this person. It's more so like, okay, so why did you guys come? And as opposed to blaming each other, or, you know, like saying like, oh, this person does X, Y, Z. When we talk about how do issues start, and the goal is to get the person who is there to put it back off on the person who doesn't see what's happening, if that makes any sense. The goal is not to get the narcissist to understand this person's emotion, because they're not going to. The thing about narcissistic personality disorder, if that's going to be labeled, there is no empathy there. They don't understand.
The callous and unemotional.
Right. Yeah. Really don't understand. But the narcissist, you can get them to see patterns, and then they know how to respond, if that makes any sense. So they might not understand the emotion, but they know, okay, well, when this is said, then I say this, as opposed to the other pattern that I've been doing, which is like, okay, so maybe I need to say something like, oh, I'm sorry, as opposed to that.
Yeah, because you're trying to get the person to change the behavior, is what I'm hearing you say.
Yeah, versus really understanding how that person feels.
And from what you're talking about is, and we'll talk about how do you deal with it, right? Because again, if it's a partner or someone you're dating or even a family member, you know, Nathaniel, you kind of said it without, but the people around them have to be part of that healing, perhaps, right? And it's like, and what are we doing? We're going to get to that in a minute in terms of how do you deal if you find yourself in a situation like this. What can you do to help the situation, right? And also, you know, just at the end of the day, you want your peace. And that's what I tell people. At the end of the day, it's about you having your peace in it. So what can you control and what can't you control? And again, I want to talk a little bit about that. Let's and Nathaniel, you alluded to this. Well, I started the term, the trauma. There's usually some trauma behind some of the behavior. But there's definitely there's some historical thing that's going on with the person who typically, I find with people who start to portray some of the behaviors that we're so used to labeling as narcissists or whatever you want to call it, right? Talk a little bit about that. What in general, what have you seen in these situations? Where's the trauma coming from?
I think the trauma comes from all different angles, right? The trauma is the context that people are born into. Is the context of knowing, and if it's really pervasive in their environment, or if it's a generational legacy that is being really like transmitted really insidiously from parent to child, or whatever the case may be, but within a family system. It's going to be a lot more intense. The expression is going to be a lot more intense. So, I think the good thing about this is the thing I love about being in LMFT is that, we were trained to work relationally, right? In therapy, we weren't only trained to conduct psychotherapy with one person, but we're also trained to look at systems. We're trained to look at families. We're trained to look at groups. We're trained to understand, how do all these things flow together? And I think that the key to that is to assuming always a trauma-informed lens, which really says like, trauma is very complex and it's nuanced, and again, it's universal, right? Coming back to that universality of it, it's everywhere, right? Everybody has experienced some part of their life where trauma has invaded, right?
Mm.
And I think that normally when we're thinking about the word trauma, we're thinking about trauma as like a big T trauma, right? We're thinking about something that's like it's noticeable, it's definable. Perhaps you would get a lot of different people, right, to agree, yeah, that's trauma. You know, trauma can be rejection. You know what I'm saying? Trauma can be you're growing up and you're growing up and you're coming up through high school, your high school years, like very formative, developmentally formative years. And you know, if you feel abandoned by your parents, or you feel, you know, rejected and abandoned by your peers, right? Or you don't feel like you look good enough, or that you act in a certain way that allows you to be a part of the in group. That can be traumatic, right? That can have a manifestation relationally as you continue to progress through life, if you never come to a place where you become aware of it and you're actually in a place and with people who allow you to confront it in a way that is therapeutic, right? And so, trauma is developmentally disruptive, and it's also emotionally bonding, right? So trauma bonds us to shame, and it reveals through the reenactment of negative and unwanted behaviors the particulars of our taintedness, right? And so for this reason, the specifics of the manifestations of taintedness in our own lives, as well as in the lives of others, result directly from our experiences of trauma, right? And so, you know, again, I'm not going to purport to be an expert when it comes to, you know, narcissism, right, or personality disorders in general, right? But I am I am an expert in trauma, right? Because I work in the social service systems. I do home visits, right? And I've done that in both in New York City and in Philadelphia. So I see the pervasiveness of trauma and how it's systemically reinforcing. And some of those behaviors that people end up in, that, somebody would call, administration of child services, and ultimately pass off a family case to me or one of my clinicians for, is going to be something that is manifesting in one person, and we're targeting the person as if the person really is the issue, when in fact the whole system is messed up. Yeah, the whole system is a problem, right? Yeah. The whole system needs to get unearthed. The whole thing needs to get addressed. And so if you kind of just if you go after the symptom, right, then what you end up doing is you end up chasing behaviors, and the actual root cause never gets addressed.
Good stuff. Quinnell, anything you want to add to that?
Yeah. So while we're talking about the systems, if we start from the parent-child in the home system, a lot of what contributes to it in the setting is if parents are really, really heavy in praise when there's something that's good. Like when there's something that they deem to be good, like academics or the way that they behave, and it's only around those specific things that they show them praise. And then all the other times in the child's life, the parent either talks down to them and, is abusive, or they neglect them and ignore them. So now the child is hungry for that type of attention and affection. That's how they develop the idea that, okay, I have to be the best. I have to do this thing. And that's the thing they see with narcissism. It's, okay, I need to be the very, very best. It's competition a lot of times. It's manipulating other people or exploiting other people so that they can get on top. And you see that it's interesting because people who are really, really, they do really, really well in business, sometimes they have those traits. But that's why I'm saying you have to be careful.
Yes.
To label somebody a narcissist. But that is how, just in the family systems, it could develop. And then if you're going to school and now you're talking about cliques and being best dressed, right? Like that's something that could also contribute to it. And if you're with a partner now, and narcissist is tricky because they will exploit you to make you give them that type of attention.
Mm.
At the same time. And so there's a lot of manipulation happening. So it's not just like you have a choice but to feed into it. It's almost like this person has molded you to feed into
Yeah.
it, right?
Yeah.
So those are the patterns that are helpful to point out.
But for sure, what I'm hearing both of you say, and Nathaniel, you really kind of dug into this piece is, looking back at everything that has happened up until whatever point you're dealing with the person becomes important in terms of what's happened behind the scenes, all these years. And we know particularly within the African American community per se, specifically, we've dealt with a lot of different things, broken homes, prison systems, all kinds of stuff that could impact how people see the world, right? And that's what they then bring to a relationship. So, okay. So your first time dealing with a toxic person in your life, on a scale of 1 to 10, how do you feel like you managed it? Because now we're going to get into how to deal with it. How do you feel like you managed it the first time you had to personally deal with it?
See, and now I'm going to remind us when I think of toxic, I'm thinking of things that were hurtful, things that were harmful to me, potentially psychologically, or just had me questioning my self-worth. But I wouldn't call the person a narcissist.
Right. So we talk about toxicity, period. Yeah.
Right. I potentially, I think I had some gaslighting for sure. For sure. If I was gonna rate how I handled it at the time, potentially like a 5, because I'm a communicator, and I think that when people show up to me or let me rephrase this, when people are behaving in a certain way that to me does not make any sense, I always want to talk about it, right? I'm an open communicator. I always want to try to understand what you're saying, but I'm very good at pointing out things that don't really make any sense. But at the point where I started to like question whether or not my memory of something was good, I talk to people, I talk it out. I make sure that I stand on what it is that is being told to me, and stand on what it is that I know is happening. But yeah, I give myself a 5 because I also think I stayed longer than I needed to stay, just because I was trying to talk it out and fix some things, because the fixer, the therapist, in a way, and me, the idealistic. I'm all, like every person is different, and that's they get into the positions that they're in or careers. But the idealistic person in me was just like, oh no, we can work on this. I just need to tweak that thing, or he needs to tweak this thing, and we'll be good. And so I give myself a 5 because I recognized it. I tried to fix it some more, over talk, but then eventually was just like, all right, well, that's not gonna work out.
Yeah. I'll talk about it too. I think I was a 5. 1 to 10, I probably was a 5. And it's funny because I really felt like, for me, when I've been in those situations, first of all, I can't believe I'm even in this situation. That's the first thing. I'm just like, oh my Lord, I can't believe I'm even having to deal with this. But I mean, there have been times like, and I've said it in my promo, I exploded because I allowed things to fester, because in my head, I'm thinking about what is the best way to deal with this, and wanting to deal with it in a way that for me, logical to deal with it. I feel like I'm a pretty pragmatic, logical person. But when you're dealing with someone who's not in that headspace, it don't matter how logical you are, right? But then you had two emotional people going at each other, right? Because immediately when you start being emotional, that person is also going to become emotional, right? And then you got the back and forth going. So for me, I like to think that now I really try my best to think before I speak, and really just try to understand where the person is coming from, and also just really try to understand the background and history. I think it's so important for us to understand the background and history of people if you're dating. Now, again, family members, we don't get to pick our family members, but we do get to choose the friends we want in our circle and the people we're dating. And just really getting to understand that background is important, right? In terms of that. Go ahead.
I think sometimes that's what keeps people staying, just from a personal, and just from watching it. When you are so curious and you're trying to give people chances and you're trying to understand. So, and at this point, I'm just talking about whether you're being lied to, whether something that's is hurtful, right? Because just because you understand something, and personally, I'm very big on understanding my role as well, as opposed to just looking at people and being like, oh, well, you did this, right? So for me, it's like I take so much time to understand what I did that, if you are so hell-bent on understanding but not holding people accountable and then paying attention to what you're going to do in response, then it can make you stay somewhere way longer than you can be.
Nathaniel.
Y'all.
Bad Nathaniel.
No, yeah. Okay, so y'all were vulnerable. I'm gonna see if I can. I'm gonna go a little bit deeper, right? So, I don't know if I can give like a number, but I will give an overview of my performance, and maybe y'all can give me a number. I'll let y'all rate me. How about that? Okay. The two of them, they're like, oh, okay. I'm like, no, but okay. So the first time I was dealing with a tainted person in a relationship, right? So again, understanding that I'm a tainted person as well, right?
Yeah.
This is the way that I'm coming to the relationship, right? I was pursuing it, right? The thing that I was looking for that turned out to be tainted was something that initially looked sweet. It was something that initially was it drew me in. It was seductive in some way. It spoke to an inadequacy or an insecurity that I felt, which operated in my blind spot, right? And y'all didn't really go too much into the relationship, but I mean, like, I think that's something that can. Quinnell, you spoke about staying in the relationship too long, right? I think that's something that can not only make you stay in the relationship too long, but go back to the relationship, right? Because you move through life and you think, oh, I've changed, or whatever the case may be, without actually having an awareness that this thing that drew you to the person in the first place has never been adequately addressed. It's never been adequately addressed, so it's still there. You're still owning this as a part of your identity, and so unbeknownst to you, you're operating from that space, right? And so your picker is broken, right? Is the way that I kind of like describe it. The things that look good to you or the things that appeal to you are they're tainted, right? And so this is kind of where so you Michelle, you spoke to dating, right? And like how you do dating now. So getting back to a Christ-centered model of holistic wellness. If I were to give dating advice, I'm gonna give two versions of dating advice. I'm gonna give dating advice if you think like I do. I'm gonna give dating advice if you don't, right? Dating advice, if you think like I do, right, is to not do it. Don't do it until you know who Christ is, until you've accepted and affirmed your identity in him, and you've allowed that process to purge and renew you, right? Until you've had a renewing of your mind and you're able to see things in a particular type of way, right? We talked about prioritization and seeing things from a top down. If you're still lost in the sauce, right? Your picker is still broken, right? If you're still in the same environments or similar environments that reinforce that old way of thinking, right? Your picker is still broken, right? The things that are appealing to you are not actually things that will enrich you, that will give you a better quality of life, right? Yeah. And so the clarity you receive as a result of understanding who your identity in Christ is will subsequently affirm your assignment, right? First and foremost, what it is that you're here to do, your purpose, which is actually going to bring fulfillment into you, which is, I think, a reason that a lot of us go into relationships in the first place. And in turn, that's going to improve your ability to discern a mate that's suitable for you, right? So kind of like start from the top, right? Who am I? Okay, What am I here to do? Okay, and on the way that you're doing that, right, you're learning about yourself, you're unlearning things about yourself, right? You're reinforcing truth in your life, you're unlearning deception. And as you're going through that process, you're also recognizing, okay, so there are some people then that are just disqualified, right? Oh, she looked good. Oh, he looked good, but you're disqualified anyway, right? Oh, this person got bread. Oh, this person got a job. Oh, this person got the car. Oh, this person is in the industry, right? But they're disqualified because they don't actually have anything to do with what you're here to do. They don't have anything to do with how you see yourself and who you understand yourself to be. They don't have anything to do with the role that's been affirmed for you and the mission that you're here to fulfill, right? So you start there, right? And you let that process go holistically instead of saying, I want what I want. I'm just going to go in and I'm going to date who's available to me, because all that ends up doing is getting you hurt, right? All it ends up doing is getting you hurt, reinforcing your trauma, right? And really kind of like setting back the clock on that healing and restoration process, right? But that's if you think like me. If you don't think like me, right? I would say
I'm like Camille, I'm like
if you don't think like me, you know what I'm saying? If you don't think like me, right?
Before I give my 2 cents.
Yeah, what I think that people should do is be mindful of changes in mood, behavior, and focus, right? If you're dealing with somebody, right? Be mindful of risk taking, right? Quinnell, you have spoken about, you kind of had a realization that, there were certain things about that person that it sounded like, I'm paraphrasing, that you were kind of like letting go, and you were saying, okay, well, maybe I can talk about this, or we can fix this, right? And what ended up happening, it sounds like, is there was a boundary that you had set in your mind, and then that boundary got crossed, right? And so if you start to see that there are boundary violations that are compromising your integrity, compromising your safety, maybe you need to own that, right? Or maybe you need, if you can't own it, right, own that perhaps you're too close to the situation to be able to think objectively about it, and rely on people who care about you and who are close to you, that can do that for you, that can assist you, right, in that process.
Yeah, and you're getting into some steps in terms of how to deal with it, but we're gonna come back to that. Okay. Quinnell, how you rate him, Quinnell?
Oh, I can't.
That's right. Give me the rating. Come on now.
I'm not rating him. He's a self-aware. See that? And that's
that's self-aware. Being self-aware.
That's the person in me that won't do the work for other people, right?
Go ahead, girl. Yes.
You got to figure out where you rated yourself, because only you were there.
Right. Yeah, and it is, like I said, I think hindsight's always 20/20, right? We always will see things once we step away from it and can easily say, okay, I would have done this differently. While you're in the middle of it, though, I mean, you just never know what you will do until you are in that place. And that's all I'll say to people, because there are things that I've dealt with, and I'm like, oh Lord, I never thought I would have done that. You know what I mean? But again, if you can learn from that situation, it's a good thing. And to your point, Quinnell, just seeing your role in that as well. And we'll talk a little bit about that. How about, okay, so let's talk about, because we've been leaning more so towards relationships, dating kind of stuff. Let's talk about friends, family members, and coworkers, right? What are some of the things that we should be thinking about when you're in those situations where you have, matter of fact, I got a call from someone this morning, like, Michelle, I wish I could join. I just had to deal with someone who has been a friend for like 10 years. And she could not believe that she was dealing with some of the things that she was dealing with, which in her head fell into that toxic space for her. How do you deal with that? Let's talk about friends first, because I think each of them has a different, your friends versus you can't pick your family, friends, family, and then we'll talk a little bit about the workspace a little bit as well. So let's talk about the friends.
So this might be, I won't even label it, I'll just say it. But so people who you find after you have spoken to them, you're constantly like, did that just happen? Am I going crazy? Am I bugging? Like, what? I know that this thing that I said happened the way that I remember it. And, to everyone's credit, memory is selective. It can be, it's all about perception also. But if it is a pattern where you're like, okay, so the person doesn't honor my emotion, they don't honor the way that I perceive something, they don't take accountability, they don't fully understand what it is that they have done wrong, like repetitively, right? I feel like because I'm gonna go back to like the narcissist ways, right? They're constantly competing with me. They need the best. They don't even want to associate with certain people who look certain ways. They're constantly worried about outward appearance and power and money, right? Like those type of people, you have to handle them the same way, regardless of whether they're a friend or whether they are a family member. Again, because, you don't get to choose your family members, but you do get to recognize your own boundaries. And it takes a lot to recognize when, if you let it go on for too long, it takes a lot to recognize when you are now talking yourself out of your own truth. And I know I'm assuming that everyone here has had a moment where you feel like, okay, well, I'm just letting this slide because now I'm thinking like, okay, well, maybe they're right. Maybe, maybe the way that they are saying that it happened. Let me give them the benefit of the doubt. So if you're finding that you are having experiences like you think you're crazy, or you're constantly being like, well, maybe they're right, I didn't see it that way, and you're not allowed to honor how you feel and what you think because the other person's not doing that, I think you have to talk to other people. If you ever find yourself saying, let me write down what happened as soon as something happens, because you're going to have to bring it up later. If you find that you have to keep receipts for people, then that starts to be a sign that like, okay, me and this person really shouldn't be talking, because if you're keeping receipts for someone, it's because you know that they are not about to honor your feelings or your emotions the way you perceive something. It doesn't make them narcissistic, but it means there's a boundary that they don't honor of yours. And maybe it gets to the point where you're starting to not respect it yourself. So I would say keep the receipts, but also start to keep your distance. You got to start that by challenging a person, like even, and this is very, very hard, but even if it takes everything in you, it's very uncomfortable, because to a certain point, we start depending on those people. We have such a strong attachment to people who've been in our lives for so long that it can make us uncomfortable, whether the person's narcissistic or not, right? Like you create a bond with someone, and part of the bond, like Nathaniel was saying earlier, is like trauma bonds. You constantly, if you feel hurt, you feel more and more connected to the person, especially because narcissists will make sure that they do this pattern of abuse where it's like, I'm gonna talk down to you, I'm gonna make you feel like trash, but then I'm gonna give you a compliment, I'm gonna praise you. Awesome. Right? So attached to that. But even if you feel uncomfortable because you don't want to lose that bond and that connection, you have to, as hard as it is, you might be crying, you might be anxious, you might be shaking. You have to take the time. You have to take the time to get yourself together and just challenge that person. If it's easier for you to do it through text versus in person, you work your way up to the comfort level.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. Nathaniel, before you answer that question, I'm going to ask another question. Because you kind of alluded to it, Quinnell, it's how do we even know that we're in this situation? Like the warning signs and signals that something is not right. What's happening there?
Yeah.
Some things we should be paying attention to for ourselves.
Yeah. If you feel like you yourself constantly asking, am I crazy? If you find yourself get into the point where you're like, you know what, I'm going to record it. Don't worry about it. I'll record. If you find yourself feeling low, like to the point where like you can look in the mirror and you think you look good, or like you look over something, an activity that was done, and you personally think, okay, I'm proud of myself, but then another person is telling you like, yeah, no, that wasn't good. But then you walk away from that person questioning what you originally thought. Those are definitely some signs. If you notice that a person is constantly in competition with you, or in competition with many other people, and if the competition has to do with like having a one up on somebody when it comes to power and control.
Yes.
Those,
Yes.
those are some sure signs.
Thank you for that. Nathaniel.
That was super comprehensive. You know what I'm saying? She ain't leave me nothing. Like there's nothing on the plate no more. You know what I'm saying? That was just really comprehensive. No, I mean, but not even in a but not in a bad way. I mean, okay, so
why don't you talk about the family member, Nathaniel? Because family, you cannot talk a little bit about that, because we can't pick our family, and sometimes we are put in situations where we're having to.
Yeah.
Right. How do you deal with a family member who is toxic or display toxic behaviors? How about
display toxic? Yeah. Display tainted behaviors. Yeah.
Yeah.
I told you I was going to challenge myself to
I
stick
know,
with that reframe.
tainted.
You know,
yes.
You know, it's interesting, right? So I did complete transparency. I had notes for every part of this. I was just like, oh, you know, I kind of know what I'm going to talk about. And this section here was the one that stumped me for whatever reason. It stumped me because I think that, you know, the way that you, okay, so the way that you deal with any relationship, and this is something that I tell people, you know, in therapy, right? It's like the way that you do one thing is the way that you do everything. And so when you come into therapy, really what therapy should be is it should be like a dress. Irvin Yalom, in his book The Gift of Therapy, he explains it as like therapy is a dress rehearsal for real life. And I've always thought that was so like acute. Like that's what therapy is. Therapy, at least I'm speaking for myself in the way that I approach therapy, right? Therapy it's helping you to build your awareness, right? Of a particular pattern, of a particular way of interaction, right? But also helping you to realize how that pattern can really be transposed in a lot of different areas of your life, right? There's very likely some sameness from the way that you view one situation and deal with it to the way that you view another situation and deal with it, from the way that you view another situation and deal with it. And so when we're talking about relationships, I see all of these things as sort of like interwoven, right? And so I see different challenges that you may have in a friendship relationship. I see that being, you know, very similar in a family relationship, right? I would say that maybe there are some extra contextual variables, maybe like power and hierarchy might play a different role. Gender also might play a different role. Culture might play a different role. Even language, right? Which is really like our, you know, language informs the way that we know and the way that we understand things, the way that we see the world. That might be, you know, a variable that's playing in. But ultimately, like the way that you are moving through your relationships, I think has an element of sameness to it, right? And so if you find yourself having boundary issues with friends, it's very likely that you either have boundary issues with, you know, certain members of your family, and or boundary issues have been modeled for you, right? I won't say boundary issues, I'll say either rigid or diffuse boundaries have been modeled for you, you know, by different members of your family. And so this is the way that you've come to understand, this is how I interact in different spaces. This is how I interact with different people. And so it could be, again, a blind spot, right? Where it's just like, it's whatever. And so when you come into therapy, what a therapist should be doing, and I feel like this is getting into another question.
And that's assuming if a person goes to therapy, because a lot of times
assuming that a person goes to therapy,
especially
right?
when you're dealing with family members. I mean, unless it's a partner, you know, you may decide together you're going to go for therapy. But if you're dealing with siblings, cousins, or parents, right? You know, our society, the way that we've been talking about therapy up until now, you didn't hear it was taboo. You don't want to talk about it, right? So people try to deal with it in silence a lot of times, right? Or don't deal with it at all.
Yeah, they want to keep things in the dark because it's preferable for them to do things, and it's preferable for all of us to do things in the dark. I think that we all have things about us that, you know, we feel ashamed about, right? We recognize that there's an imperfection somewhere, right? Which is human, right? But as a result of recognizing that we have that imperfection, we shy away from addressing it in a direct type of way in a relational exchange, which is actually going to be the most restorative, right? Because we don't want people to see us, right? We don't want people to see our shame, but in fact, we do want people to see us, right? We do want to be known. We do want to be seen. We do want to be heard. We do want to be understood. That's what actually makes something therapeutic. So, I mean, to your point, Michelle, you don't necessarily have to go to therapy to have a therapeutic relationship or a therapeutic exchange, right? But it does have to be vulnerable. And it does have to be focused in the here and now. It does have to move from content to process, right? It does have to say, okay, so this is what's happening. So this is kind of like the upper layer, right? They did this, and then you did this, and then whatever happened, right? And then you kind of go deeper into that, and you say, okay, so like, do you see the way that you responded to that, right? Or do you like what's coming up if you were to use like a somatic method of therapy, like where is that coming up in your body? Right? Is your body holding a particular trauma in relation to this experience, right? Do something to draw it into the present so that a person actually has to confront it, because that's what makes it therapeutic. Otherwise, we're all just, we're moving on autopilot, you know? So, I mean, the only thing I think that I would like add or maybe go differently is I believe that the emphasis should be on grace, right? I think that particularly when it comes to some of these relationships, like friend relationships, coworker relationships, or family member relationships, there's an element of things that you can control, and there's an element of things that you can't control, right? And so you accept the things that you can't control, right? And you do what you can with the things that you can. But at the same time, trying to give somebody grace is ultimately going to give you peace, right? I don't think that we necessarily have to own everything that people do to us, right? So a situation doesn't necessarily need to devolve to the level of taintedness or dysfunction that it could, right? If we're able to recognize, like, that person got their own stuff, right? That person got their own stuff, and I can't make them deal with it if they don't want to deal with it, right? But I can deal with mine, right? I can deal with what that's bringing up for me, right? And I can do that in a way that allows me to disconnect from deception and reconnect with truth.
So I have another question that came up. Thank you, Pat, for this question. It says, how do you deal with it when the toxicity has been imagined in one's mind, when they no longer know what is normal, no therapy involved? No therapy has been involved. I'm going to assume that's what that means. So anyone want to take that?
I'm not sure. I think I'm a little bit confused on the question.
Yeah. So how long? I'll say it again. How do you deal with it when the toxicity has been imagined in one mind, when they no longer know what is normal?
Like
self-defeating thoughts, or
that's the way I'm taking it. Yeah, that's the way I'm taking it when I read that that statement, Nathaniel.
But can you say the last part of the question has been imagined and
imagine one's mind, and when they no longer imagine, ingrained, she said.
Oh,
So does that help?
Well, it does. If you want to go first, Quinnell, but it does help.
So like if the toxicity has been ingrained in their mind, and so essentially, are you saying you don't recognize that you're in something that's toxic?
Well, it sounds like the other person it's been ingrained in that person's mind, right? When the toxicity has been ingrained in one's mind, imagined in one's mind, when they no longer know what is normal. Appears
like you've consumed a great deal of it. Yeah, you need to purge. You need to purge from that, right? So this is the reason why. So when we talk about faith, and we talk about therapy, right? There's a huge movement right now that's going on that's saying, like, Jesus and therapy, right? Therapy and Jesus. I believe that therapy should be pointing you to Jesus, right? Like therapy, we're not actually, again, my belief, we're not actually healing. Right, we're not healing. We're facilitating a healing experience. We're using elements that have been modeled by Christ in order to show up differently in relationships. We're following a model, right? We're not allowing ourselves to basically dictate, this is the way that you go about it, that's the way that you go about it, this is what the research shows. You either have faith that this is the way to go, or you don't. And you usually have faith that this is the way to go if you put it to work, if you've experienced some fruit in your life, right? And so when I say purge, sometimes we think about like, there's more that I need to do, right? I'm stuck. I need to be doing more, right? Sometimes you really need to do less. Sometimes you need to work on forgiving yourself, right? What it sound like, what I heard when she was when you were reading that question was that this is somebody who's probably been through some trauma, right? Perhaps been through some abuse, right? And and probably has a really difficult time forgiving herself, right? And some of the lies may actually be intermixed with some of the complicity, right? And also there's an absence of nuance that enables her to see, like I said, right, how she got there in the first place, right? Looking at the system as a whole and really starting from the root up, right? And so if you just look at your behaviors and you say, like, I just want to stop thinking a thought, right? Or I just want to be different, or whatever the case may be, what you're looking for is a superficial change, right? That ultimately is not going to give you the relief that you're looking for, because it took you X and Y and Z experiences to get here in the first place. You got to start from the bottom. You got to start from the bottom. And it sounds like for that sister, forgiveness is the bottom, right? And that might be difficult enough for her. She don't need to do nothing else except trying to forgive herself, right?
We have accepted the toxicity that's going on, and we almost look at it as normal.
Right?
Yeah.
Well, that's probably why I got hung up so much on the question.
Yeah.
Because if you think something is normal, right, then there's two parts to that. You could think something is normal and it's okay, or you think something is normal and you know that it's not okay.
Yes.
So the reason why I was trying to get so clear on this question is just like, if you're telling yourself it's imagined, that's not coming from you initially.
Right.
If you recognize something and you're saying, oh, I'm making this up in my head. Now that's the other person's voice, and they've conditioned you to use that voice. But if something came up for you initially, something in your gut, and every person has this, right? It's something in your gut that makes you question. You don't know if it's right, you don't know if it's wrong, but if a question comes up for you, then you sit in that and you explore that, because questions are made to be answered, which means that they can be challenged, which means that they can be, I'm sure she'll come back. She probably,
I was about to say, we just lost her.
Made a mistake, y'all. I'm sure she'll be back soon, but like questions are made to be answered / challenged. And in answering a question by yourself, you will find multiple answers. And for me, if you find multiple answers to a question, that means that there is no factual evidence for whatever it is you're telling yourself.
Yeah. And I, maybe I need to take my glasses off, because she did use the word ingrained. I said imagine, but I think we finally got to the point where you're talking about. So good stuff. So here's another question someone said, and I'm gonna post this one here. We have been exploring the conversation from the perspective of someone who feels imposed upon by a toxic person. Can we flip it? How do we best relate to a person who feels so traumatized that any boundary or full expression on your part is a trigger for them? Good question.
That's interesting, because if we're talking about it from the standpoint of the narcissist, that's real. They don't even, they don't even realize what they're doing is manipulative, and they can draw you in. They could draw you into that type of blame and manipulation that, this is something that you did to them, and you're the cause for why they're responding to you in a way that's so hurtful. But how do you relate to that person? You have to be very careful, because for me, I'm trying to keep this into the perspective of hurtful versus, there's a narcissist, and this is narcissistic personality disorder. But let's say the person is just having these hurtful and traumatic responses to something, and your behavior is triggering them. I think you make sure to show understanding for a person's feelings. You make sure to show understanding for a person's perception of something. But you can separate perception from reality in a way, right? So what I mean by that is one person can have the way that they view things, you can have the way that you view things, but you can still hold space to let them know that you think that they're allowed to have whatever emotion that they're having, and you know, your intent wasn't this particular thing, right?
Yes.
Whatever it is that they felt. Now, if that person starts to bring up the trigger so much so that you're like, okay, listen, our connection is being harmed because you're now viewing me as this way, that could be a conversation for the person to talk about, you know, like what has happened to them. That could be a moment for you to sit and listen and say, you know, there are some really hurtful things that have happened to you, there's some really valid things that have happened to you, and are you willing to work through that? What ways are you willing to work through that? There's therapy, that's one component. There's friendship, there's exercise, there's the way that you eat, the way you diet, right? There's some things that you can do where if you're just literally opposed to therapy, right? There are some things that you can do, but just to start the person in the right path, just to hear what they're saying out loud could be helpful. It could be really helpful to them.
Thank you, Cornell. Nathaniel, anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, I was thinking when I was reading the question, I was thinking about like a trauma informed approach, right? Like when we go back to, like, let me take it back to grad school. Like when we go back to grad school and we learn about trauma and how to address trauma in a clinical setting, there's kind of like this is what you do, and that's it's kind of like ... right? And really where we start with is like education. And I think that education, kind of psychoeducation, that's keeping it clinical. But I think that speaking more personally to what Cornell was saying, there can be a conversation, or perhaps there should be a conversation that, you know, starts to, as she said, separate what's reality from what's perception, right? Like let's come and agree upon rules of engagement. Right. Let's come in and let's actually have an understanding about how we are defining toxic. Right. What makes something that I've done to you toxic? Like, explain that to me. Right. I want to validate your experience, and I definitely don't want to make you feel threatened as a result of being in proximity to me. So, but that means that we have to have an exchange, and I need to learn more information. But then the next part after that is stabilization. Right. I think that a big part of somebody who, I'm imagining, a big part of somebody's experience who has gotten to the point where everything is a trigger for them has probably experienced a great deal of inconsistency in their relationships, right? Trauma aside, they've experienced a great deal of inconsistency with people telling them one thing, it's a lie. You know, I don't know what's true. I don't know what's good for me. I don't know what's, like, all of that stuff. They're probably again, right, their picker is wrong, right? Their discernment is out of whack as a result of the trauma that they've experienced. And so the best way that you can just show up in that person's life, just on a baseline, is to actually present to them an even keel of consistency, right? You're consistently compassionate, right? You're consistently clear on what a boundary is and what a boundary isn't. Like, what's the boundary that we can maintain? What's the boundary violation? Right. Yeah. You're consistently clear about, you know, the types of things perhaps that are shared. Right. You're consistent about when a person is just looking for, you know, somebody that they can vent to, and when somebody is looking for, you know, some input. Right. So that they don't feel like you're judging them. Right. But whatever the case is, you're consistent. Right. Yeah. You're consistent. Yeah. And really, I believe that type of healing, right, the type of healing that a person like that would require really can only take place in a relational context, only in a relational situation, because of the fact that the trauma has been relational, right? Yeah. And so if the trauma has been relational, then the restoration needs to be relational as well. And so there does need to be like a very real conversation, again, that's brought into the here and now about, you know, what Cornell put it best. What's the work that you're doing? Like what, you recognize that this is a problem? Can we come to a place where we recognize that this is an issue, right? Okay, if we come to a place where we recognize that this is an issue, it's not working for our relationship health, right? let's talk about what we can do what we can do about this, right? What's the work that you're willing to put in? Because if a person is not willing to put in any work, you can lead them to the water, but they're not going to drink it, right? And all you're doing is it becomes a moot point, right? And at that point, you need to start thinking about, okay, well, how can I protect myself in this situation? How can I maintain my an appropriate boundary in this situation so that I don't get sucked in? Because again, right, remember that trauma is looking to reenact, right? Trauma is looking to reenact the behavior. So they may not necessarily know that that's what they're doing, but it's very likely that the way that they're interacting with you, unbeknownst to them, is the way that other people have interacted with them. And if they can't draw an awareness of that and sort of like separate that from what it is that they're trying to get to, you know, you may need to distance yourself.
I was gonna say, go ahead, Cornell, and then I'll kind of summarize what I heard you say. Go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say that the reason for those conversations initially are to help, draw the awareness. The reasons for the sitting and listening to a person, understanding where they're coming from, holding the space for them emotionally, letting them talk. Telling them that you understand, if you truly understand, but you want to ask questions so that you can understand, but tell them that you understand how they feel, and then bringing up your perception. The reason for those conversations are so that you can bring awareness to the other person. But at a certain point, if it's ingrained in them and they're not open and willing to do something different, then you have to decide, like, all right, I'm having too many of these conversations. Like,
right.
I'm good. Now I have to distance myself because this is draining to me.
Yeah. So there is distancing in that. But what I'm hearing you guys say, try at least to have the conversation. Right? Have a conversation, gain some understanding. And if it's just a no-win situation, then you have some decisions to make in terms of your boundary that you need to set there. Okay. Co-workers, and I'll speak a little bit about this, but from a co-worker perspective, in my mind, first of all, no sane employer is going to allow toxicity to continue in the workplace if it is known, right? So first of all, it needs to be known. And again, depending on the size of the organization, right? Some large organizations, you may not know, a leader may not know something is happening unless it's brought forward to them. But what I will say to people out there, if you find yourself in a toxic relationship at work, you need to speak up. If you can talk to the person about it, fine. If you can't talk to the person about it, then you need to go to the next level. Bring in a leader, bring in a manager, someone who can bring you together, bring the two of you together and have that conversation. Again, depending on what kind of relationship it is at work that you have with the person. But just know, it happens in the workplace. It does. And Cornell, you had talked a little bit about it, alluded to it earlier on. But it has to be confronted, you guys. And the best way is, what you have to decide is, do you try to handle it yourself, or is it time to bring in a professional, employee relations, human resources, again, depending on the size of your organization, but don't think you have to deal with that by yourself, right? People can lose their job for bringing toxicity into the workplace if it's not dealt with.
But you also have, hopefully, big businesses, they have the EAP.
Exactly, employee assistance programs. Yes, ma'am.
So that's another resource. But
yes.
I truly do believe that, and I think that they touched on this, like, you treat those people with those same behaviors the same way, right? So it's about keeping receipts. It's about challenging things, challenging people's perceptions or whatever it is that they're trying to put on you or tell you that it happened a particular way. I think when it comes to work, if it's about, if it's in a form of like gaslighting, which, I think likely that's likely to happen unless you get super close with somebody at work, then that's a different, that takes on a different context. Gaslighting, the most helpful thing in a work environment is definitely to keep receipts and
report it.
Yeah, report it, bring another person in so that they could be I don't have a better word besides like a sounding board and a judgment, you know, a person that brings upon another judgment.
Yeah.
So I have a question. I have a question.
Yes.
So the suggestions that y'all are making right now about dealing with employees, is there any distinction between individuals who are in like a remote work environment versus people who are in like a brick and mortar still, about how you would deal with this situation or what some of those steps might look like?
It's the same. From an HR perspective, I would say it's the same. If you're sensing some kind of toxicity from a person, document it, number one, right? If you have witnesses, definitely, you know, talk about who else might have seen it, right? Who can corroborate your story, but definitely speak about it, right? Because employers don't want that in the workplace. They just don't. It's not good. It's not good for them personally. It's not good for them because that's not the environment that and the culture that they're trying to cultivate in the workplace. It's not good business too, depending on what kind of business you're in. It's not good business to have that happening in the workplace. So I would say from an employee's perspective, if you're sensing or feeling a certain way, you want to speak to someone who can help you manage through it. And it could be a boss, or it could be having a conversation with HR, employee relations, EAP programs. If you're a large organization that has an employee assistance program, but get some help. Definitely don't deal with that alone, is what I would say. Right. Okay, Quinnell, we're going to add to that.
Yeah, the only difference that I was imagining that you were thinking of, but you know, you can shed light on this, is it's just like the overwork component, being that remote work has looked like piling loads of work on people.
Yeah.
But I think in those regards, you try to talk to your supervisor initially, but if that conversation is one where you are leaving the conversation like, this person is making me think that what I'm saying is not true, and you know, the emotions that I have are not really real, I shouldn't be doing that. Somebody else, especially like comparing you to other people, like those conversations, like, well, the person before you did it, or these people have done it, and you know, those things are not an issue. Again, this is not this behavior doesn't make somebody a narcissist or a gaslighter. But you know, these are things that can be hurtful to your, you know, to your mental, to your emotional, and even to your physical, because you know, stress definitely affects our body. But if the initial person that you're talking to is making you feel that way, then go above them, get some witnesses together, and especially because again, the way that we show up in spaces has a lot to do with how we are conditioned from childhood. So if you're starting to be triggered by things that other people are saying to you, then you know, that could definitely be a time to ask for the EAP program. There might be some paid therapeutic sessions.
Absolutely. Last topic here. Teenagers. I work with a lot of teenagers. We had a mentoring program for 10 years, but also work with a program for my sorority, right? And I hear it a lot, and I want you guys just to talk about this a little bit. Warning signs for teenagers who are dating, right? Warning signs. We have a parent or even a teenager who runs across this. When should a teenager seek help, right? Because you hear so much now, the younger people being in relationships, and again, that history and things like that. And I don't know if young people would even think about, well, let me ask them about the family history. You know what I mean? But just what would you say to a teenager who's listening to this in terms of when they should seek help?
I mean, I don't. Okay, so I'll be honest. I don't see a great deal of distinction around how those behaviors might manifest. Right. The only thing that I think is different is context. Right. Because of the fact that teenagers are going to be in a school environment where there's a lot more that could be feeding into those relationships. There's a lot more unknowns. Right. There's a lot more there's a lot more markers, right, for the adults that are in proximity of them to track. And not just school, that's one context, but I think the other context, which is much more insidious, is social media, right? You know, I'm not gonna get on the soapbox here.
Yeah.
I'm not gonna get on the soapbox here.
Yeah.
But
that's a whole
you know,
different. We can have a whole.
that's a whole different.
We have
It's a whole
nother
different thing.
podcast that I might have to ask you guys.
Oh my goodness. Oh man. But you know, I'll try and keep it brief. But it sounds like you already have an idea of where I'm going with it, right? What I'm even alluding to. You know, social media in and of itself is like, it's built around deception, right? It's built around an image of something appearing to be something that it isn't necessarily, right? And so, you know, if I would say that if a teenager, like just practical stuff, right? If a teenager finds themselves, you know, providing a great deal of information or exchanging pictures, right? Inappropriate pictures, you know, over social media, with the understanding or the belief that a person is going to treat that private information with dignity and respect. That's just not, it's not a good idea. I'm not even gonna get into why it's not a good idea. It's just not a good idea. Don't do it. You know what I'm saying? Like, don't do it.
Yeah.
I think that, you know, integrity and character are things that need to be tested at every stage of human development. And when teenagers are sort of like moving through, you know, those formative years, you know, we have to understand that their personalities have not been completely developed yet, right? At the last time I saw the research, and Quinnell, you can jump in on this because I'm not going to go too far into it. But like the last time I saw the research on this, like the frontal lobe of the brain that actually plays very deeply into you know, personality expression is not actually fully formed until you get to like your mid-20s. Right. And so a lot of the decisions that teenagers are making are like, they're half cocked. Right. There's a lot of risk taking behaviors that they think that they've thought all the way through, but they actually haven't. And so in order for, I think, adults to appropriately hedge against, you know, all potential negative outcomes, they just need to be on top of it a little bit more than perhaps they feel comfortable, or perhaps even their teens would seek to allow them. But, you know, because of the fact that we're moving into an increasingly interconnected world, and like a global community, a global marketplace of data and information exchange, it's necessary for the adults who are responsible for, you know, the development of the next generation, to be a little bit more vigorous, right? To be a little bit more vigorous, to have a better understanding about, you know, what this new technology is, and then to actually start modeling for their teens how to engage with it, right? Start modeling for their teens how to have healthy relationships, right? You can tell your teen to do something all you want until you're blue in the face, but if your teen doesn't see that you're doing it, they're gonna be like, "Oh, you're a hypocrite. You're a hypocrite. Why should I listen to you? For what? For why?"
I know. Look,
you don't do it.
Look, I see a making of another episode of Real Conversations, Michelle. We'll save that for later. We put that.
That's all I got.
I'm gonna put that in my pocket. I'll put that in my pocket.
Quinnell, go ahead.
Quinnell, last words, Miss Quinnell.
Yeah, I was actually taking some time to stew on this because of the way that you asked the question. Because of the timing and this being Facebook, I'm quite sure there are no teenagers on there.
No, but people might look at it. You know what I'm saying?
They be all right.
They'll look at it.
They'll be all right.
But I was thinking about it from the perspective of teenagers, and you know, when you think about teenagers, it's like a lot of teenagers are talking to their friends first. And if you find that you're a friend, I'll say this two ways. If you find that you're a friend who's constantly having to talk sense into your friend, like, "Okay, girl, sir, this is not a good idea. Why are you doing that? You're crazy. Why?" If you see that your friend is doing things that are going against just general respect, you see your friend being disrespected and they are still continuing to do certain things, right? Then that might be a sign that your friend is being manipulated to do some things, and you just want to you want to open up the conversation and not particularly just say, oh, you're crazy, like why would you do that, but really, really get to the heart of what that person is hoping to get from this exchange. And then maybe point out the patterns that you've seen. And as an adult, that could be also your approach initially, right? Before you have to take the vigilance, it's like, okay, what is it that you're hoping to get from this exchange? Whatever it is that you're thinking of doing, or whatever it is that you have done already, what were you hoping to get? And what did you get instead? And how does that make you feel?
Yeah.
Because if you're constantly doing things that then they make you feel bad, then we have to figure out, how are you willing to change this feeling, even if it's just like a little tiny bit, right?
Yeah.
If we don't work on completely changing the behavior today, tomorrow, especially if you're not in harm's way, like literally like tomorrow something bad is going to happen to you, then how do we work toward just changing maybe one little thing, and then we build upon that over time? But for parents, it's very big to make your child feel comfortable to speak to you. And there's a boundary, right, when you're talking about controlling your child, right? But usually the most effective ways at controlling your child is if there's some warmth there, but there's still some boundaries set in.
Yeah.
So not like, oh yeah, I'm gonna be warm, I'm gonna be your best friend. I'm still gonna tell you,
yes,
tell you that things are wrong, but I don't need to be super, super strict or shame you or talk down to you. Parents, especially especially minority parents, it's like what I say goes. You don't really have a say, so you have to do what I say.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly. So, yes.
When you see your child in a really, really tough spot, just mentally, abusively, you have to change the approach a little bit, because teenagers in general, like the more you force, they're gonna do the opposite thing. And if their psychological and emotional well-being is involved, you kind of gotta take the approach of understanding a little bit.
Well, like I said, I see this being a part 2. We'll figure out when. So first of all, I want to thank you both for taking the time to have what I probably the last 6 months, this has been one of those topics where people have been struggling. I did a friendship episode in June, and I had gotten some text messages afterwards just talking about, the toxic friendships, right? And people wanting to deal with it. And we know, relationships, period, can be challenging, in and of itself. But I appreciate both of you. So where can people find you? They want someone to talk to or need someone to talk to. How do they get in contact with you? How can they find you?
If you want to reach me, you can go to www.counselingtocomfort.com. You spell 2TO. Again, that is www.counselingtocomfort.com. And if you have any questions or you just want some tips, you want to check out what I'm doing, you can follow me on IG, and that would be Quinnell_Hickman. And on Facebook, it's at Quinnell Hickman.
Yeah. And I'll make sure following this podcast, you guys, I'll post within the next 2 days. I'll post the information, the links and stuff like that. How about you, Nathaniel?
You probably can't find me on social media because I try to be very far. No. Yeah. Okay. So I'm really not active on social media because like I said before, I'm not in private practice right now. But if you want to reach out to me because you have thoughts, questions, responses, whatever the case may be, you can find me at on IG _Nate Cultivates. That's NATECUL TIVATES.
My spelling Look, text it to me, and I can make sure I add that to my. Yeah, text it to me, Nathaniel. But
I got you.
I'm gonna put you again. Appreciate you too, Nathaniel. You now have been added to my list of people I'm going to tap into to have a real conversation about some things. In addition to Quinnell, as usual, Soror. We'll tap into you as well. So I'm gonna put you guys in the green room, and feel free. We could talk later. I won't have to go back. I know it's late, but it's been a real good conversation, everyone. And thank you for your questions. Told you I was going to get deep. But this is real stuff. This is things that we are all having to deal with in some shape, form, or fashion. And as I said when I opened up, I really do have a heart for helping people, and this is a platform where we can all learn and grow together. I know I did. And yeah, we're gonna keep it moving. I don't know what I'm talking about next, but I got so many things in my head, y'all. But I will keep you posted. But you can find me. My website is www.mybesteveryday.com. You can find the podcast. If you want to go back and watch these, you can. I do keep them posted on my personal Facebook page as well as my business page. My business page is www.facebook.com/mybesteveryday. And yeah, check out my blogs too. I wrote a couple of blogs on my website, so check that out. Until next time, you guys, do whatever you need to do to keep yourself healthy. And remember, your peace is important. Your peace is so important. So do what you can to protect your peace always. Have a good night.
Bye.